put off by how long this video is. Don't worry, I try to jam-pack my videos with as much content and as much detail as I possibly can. Anything I feel I can comment on and that I feel you might be interested in, I pretty much put in the video. I try not to repeat myself and talk fairly fast. A Bug's Life PlayStation 1 video game review. Starting with plot. A small village of hard workers is extorted yearly for the fruit of their labor by a ruthless group. One day the decision is made, though not popular with everyone, to try to hire a group to defend them. So yeah, Seven Samurai with bugs. You gotta start your kids on Kurosawa early. You play as Flick, a creative but clumsy ant who leaves the village to find someone to defend them. And he finds some, and I think I'm gonna leave it at that. You will use the special abilities of the group you find some, and even the youngest and most different animals you find that are on your side will help out in some way, which is a very good message for the kids. And this is the first in a series. I don't tend to throw out old games, and I still have a bunch of PlayStation 1 games and some PlayStation 2 that I can play, and you know, it's now going to be on my PS2 since my PlayStation 1 finally gave up. But yeah, there are going to be more reviews like this. You know, PlayStation 1 games that I played when I was younger. So also some PC games that fit in this category. And yeah, games that I, at the very least, don't hate playing again. You know, even some of these games in this category that I don't necessarily love, I do have some nostalgia for. And as I meant to say in the Cybermercs video, I will be revisiting, currently it's about a dozen and a half, it might grow, games that I've done videos on where I feel I have more to say on them today. And yes, I am in fact out of games that I've never played to do videos on, and when next I get a new game, it'll probably go to the top of the list of what games I'll review. And now I'm going to get political, so if there are kids watching this right now, go to the description box, skip to the on-plot section, and if you're not a kid but don't want to hear it, feel free to do that as well. Before I get into the various political, is it just me, or is Flick really close to a really dirty word? Should they maybe have thought, or is it intentional? Did they want to, you know... Dad, I want to be like Flick. What did you just... Oh, the ant, right. I just like to tackle the nobody dies from lack of health care. The man is obviously correct. They go to a special farm. There's a hammock made of dreams. It's complicated. And, you know, Trump fired Comey because he just loves firing people. You know, he took too long to fire Flynn, so he didn't want to risk the same with Comey. He fired him because he wasn't doing a good job. He wasn't doing a good job investigating Trump. It's so obvious. Comey really should have reached a decision already. And Trump was warned by Obama not to hire Mike Flynn, but the staff said, you know, oh, they thought he was joking. You know, like, dude, you cannot hire Flynn. He is the sickest. Dude! And TYST's Anna Kasparian said that Betsy DeVos isn't going to go to the grave of that university's founder, and she has no business going to commencement. I disagree. She's definitely going to go to that grave, and she's going to do her business there. It looks like Sean Spicer might be out. I'm not saying it's likely, but I would love to see Bill O'Reilly take over. Just the very first time he has to talk to the press, you just need one journalist to prod him, and he'll go off. Why did you leave Fox News? You look hungry. Would you like a loofah? You know, like Trump, he has a horrible temper, he can only keep calm when he's in control of what's being said, and he in general has little impulse control. It's pretty typical for conservative white men who are adult or middle-aged. Trump points out that he's gotten an A or an A plus on foreign policy and nobody's thought about it. I mean, that's just true. Nobody thought about giving him an A or an A plus on that. I mean, nobody's thought about giving him an A or an A plus on anything. He's busy making our heads spin, projectile vomiting, and screaming about how he's effing us. On one hand, Republicans say that sexual assaults aren't a big deal. Now they say it's a pre-existing condition, something so bad you lose health care. So which is it? And in this one, I'm going to be completely serious. An Ohio man just confessed to rape without realizing it, and a lot that should be said about that already was on TYT. What I'd add is, just note the values, the understanding that he's operating from. It hurts when a girl loses her virginity. First off, that's only true if you're doing it wrong. Second, then how about you step up to the plate and be the guy who doesn't have sex with a virgin? Even if you do think, and he does, that it's okay to hurt a girl during sex if she's a virgin, just don't. Don't have sex with a virgin. On plot. It's safe again. While I have watched Ants a lot of times, since a friend of mine had a VHS copy around the time these two came out, I haven't watched, you know, I probably did watch A Bug's Life back in the day, back when it came out, but I haven't watched it, you know, in ages, since, like, probably before 2003, so I'm not gonna talk about differences between the two in plot and such. As a kid, I watched every major animated Disney feature, you know, when it came out. And for a few, I got the game. The games I've played countless times over the years, except for the Lion King one, which I barely played except in more recent years. And I don't really watch Disney anymore, animated or otherwise. And this is one that I never owned. You know, I never owned my own copy of the film, so I haven't watched it many times. And most of these I did not watch in English, since my country dubs children's movies, at least the main releases. I don't have any of them on DVD in years past before I could watch any of them in English at all, so keep that in mind if I mispronounce a name or mix up characters or the like. Now, as others have pointed out, the game follows the movie very well. You know, some levels are exaggerating the importance it has in the movie, making full levels relying on smaller scenes from the movie. But, you know, that's gonna happen in movie game transitions. And yeah, and you know, the goals and levels are, you know, getting Flick to do events that match the storyline of the movie. You know, you see in the movie how Flick is in, you know, very early in the movie he enters the anthill. So the first level is just you moving from, you know, an area fairly close to the anthill to moving into the anthill, and then the cutscene picks up the moment that you enter the anthill of what immediately happens around that. Yeah. And I'm not going to give that away for those who haven't, because it's fairly funny. And basically every level starts with a short clip from the movie that, you know, tells you exactly, you know, it's not like it just drops you into the middle of it anyway. You always get, you know, every level has a title and a brief, like, goal description or the like, and yeah, then you get this clip of the movie that tells you exactly when it's taking place, although a few of them aren't directly, like, a few of them are just this is something that happens in the movie close to what's going, yeah, what's going to happen in the level. Where you are in the movie is basically what we're setting up with this clip, not yeah. And yeah, there are bonus items such as collecting 50 pieces of grain, 4 letters that spell flick, and permanently finishing off each enemy bug. And annoyingly, the letters may remain at the top of the screen once you have them all, and in a few levels you can collect them all before a while before you complete the level, so they're just up there spinning and glowing, and it really wouldn't have been difficult for them to just, yeah, just have them up there for a few seconds, then remove them, as they do with every other thing that you pick up that has some effect on you. They don't keep displaying that effect, and I mean, you're not gonna forget, because it takes effort to get all 4 letters. You're not gonna forget. None of the levels are long enough that you're gonna just completely forget. Yeah. Every element in the game, visual, audio, interactive or otherwise, it all fits in the world, and that's something that these Disney action games do fairly well at. The when you do a licensed game and it's at the same basic time, sometimes there are games where something about the movie changed a lot during development, and suddenly there's something in the game that's not in the movie anywhere, and that doesn't really happen a lot with these Disney, the ones that I've played anyway, of these. So yeah. For some reason, when you select a level from the menu, it doesn't show how much you picked up of the different collectibles. Not, the if you got all of them, yeah, not even for levels you've. What did I write there? Yeah, I'm not saying it should for ones. It shouldn't do that for levels you haven't already completed. You then get counts for how many enemies there are to take out. The other two, it's always the same. There's always 50 grains and 4 letters. Protagonist's name is, after all, a 4-letter word. But then you can get that count by starting a level and then leaving it, so maybe it should. But yeah, it only displays the ones you've already gotten all of. It doesn't tell you how close you got to the ones you didn't quite get, which affects how likely you are to try again. Some levels, it's like some levels get really frustrating and obnoxious the first time you complete them, and then if you're gonna play it again, okay, Sam, you know basically what you have to do, presuming that you don't wait too long to replay it. And something that's really going to encourage you is, oh, I actually got almost all of these, versus, oh, I actually got almost none of those. So, yeah. Menu selection is always accompanied by a splat sound, which, if you really hated that game, that would seem very fitting. As others have pointed out, the game has that overly cheery, happy, benign, bright feel that seems harmless but really rots your brain at an alarming rate. Kids don't benefit, they actually worsen. The other Disney action games don't really have this issue, and the movie itself dares to be scary, exciting, and in general other things than happy, and a bunch of the game does. I don't know why they went for overly cheery for any of it. It really doesn't. Yeah, it's yeah. And at least one reviewer was up in arms about how the ants have the wrong number of legs in the game. I mean, they try to make them as humanoid as possible so that kids have an easier time relating to them. That's all. But yeah. And moving on to critics, or in this case, maybe crickets. I have only played the PlayStation 1 version. Some reviewers give this a 0.5 out of 5, which is unplayable, and some give it 4.5 out of 5, which is outstanding. And I'd say it's a little closer to the middle, but it's really not unplayable. Some of the things that are actually mentioned in really negative reviews aren't actually the case in the PlayStation 1 version, and I mean, these are mostly reviews from GameFAQs. Maybe some of the people reviewing didn't realize that there are, you can submit your review for any console version of the game. You don't have to put it on just the, yeah. Basically, it has a few really frustrating elements, and in general, it's not an amazing game, but it's not unplayable, and it's really not, like, it's not going to frustrate you anywhere near as much as a number of other licensed games. I mean, if you go into this and you don't adjust your expectations for licensed games, and I'm not saying you necessarily should, I mean, yeah, by conventional standards, if you don't, grade on a curve, then yeah, this is really not a very impressive game. If you played this and you had no idea there was a movie connected, you'd think, wow, this is crap. But, as a game that was developed in a hurry to come out at the same time as a movie that was really the main, they took the time to make the movie that was basically appropriate. They didn't rush through the film, they rushed through the game. So, yeah. And yeah, the Nintendo 64 version got a 54 out of 40%, 54.40% out of 100. PlayStation 55.73%. Game Boy Color version got 36.63%. I can imagine that the Game Boy version is simpler in many ways. I've never understood. I used to love the Game Boy, and there are a lot of great things about it. I've probably had more. Well, now maybe overall I've probably had more PlayStation 1 games than Game Boy games. But anyway, the Game Boy is for stuff like Super Mario Land. It's not for, yeah. I don't understand why you would play a game like this, a 3D game yeah. I mean, it almost must be 2D on that. But anyway. And You know, and something that's pretty frustrating in the game is that if you take out an enemy with anything less than the golden berry, or yeah, there are a few versions. I'm gonna get into that, but most of the time when you take out an enemy, it's going to respawn seconds later. And you know, at least it's not Nocturne, where taking out a skeleton will make it reassemble faster the next time, each time you take it out. And one reviewer said, you know, he didn't know why the why licensed games tend to be really bad, even though the films were great. You know, too little time, too little creative freedom. You know, again, the people making the movie. The movie is the main thing. You know, that's what they're really interested in. And you know, in other cases, it's the opposite when it's a movie based on a video game instead. You know, the original product was what was put the most effort into, and it fit the medium that it was originally designed for. That's where, you know, and that's not to say, you know, there are still incredibly talented people working on the, you know, the other product, but the other product is always going to, it's not, it's specifically made to fit with something else that was, you know, it's very rare that you see something licensed where it was developed for more than one medium at the same time with the same freedom and passion. Gameplay. Now, the game is played from the third-person perspective with the camera behind you. The world is fully 3D and you can move in any direction, and the camera is a little loose and will try to move when you know, as you move through the world, and that can get really annoying, but I'm going to get more into the camera. And moving on to controls. Now, the controls do take a little getting used to, and something I've found that's really a problem with several of these, you know, it's not an all, so I don't know why they thought this was a good idea, or maybe they just weren't good at doing it any other way, but it's not the case in Aladdin or The Lion King. I don't remember it being the case in Tarzan, but this and Hercules, for some reason, the control is weak and slow, and it feels like you're controlling this heavy mech-like creature. You know, it needs to run every movement command through a series of filters before commencing with them. You know, from what I remember in the film, they're running around, you know, with ease, with quick reflexes and such. So yeah, I really don't know why they did it this way. And you know, sometimes for a careful far platform jump, it can be useful to do the butt stomp right after, you know, once you've made it most of the way, once you've, you know, jumped just about all of the way. You know, when you do, it's more responsive. It, you know, it stops you moving far. It's almost like your character kind of slips at the end of a jump. Often, you know, once you land on your feet, for some reason the character will start to slip just a little bit, slide ahead, as if he's like on, yeah, like in a lot of platform games, if you land on ice, you know, your character will slide for a few seconds. It's like that in this, if you don't do the butt stomp. And that's, and to be clear, as soon as you've started the butt stomp, if you then want to stop moving, then you have to jump again, otherwise you'll slide, you know. But yeah, that's something I found helped a lot. And it can also sometimes help you close the distance if you jump as far as you can and it's just barely, just not entirely enough. Do the butt stomp, and you know, that little bit extra boost ahead will close the distance. And yeah, and you know, otherwise the butt stomp can be used to take out enemies, and you know, there are some enemies that it cannot take out. And the game supports vibration, and maybe I'm just a sucker for a gimmick. I know that you know, I love the Wii, you know, back when I still played it. I have to admit, I always really loved the vibration on the, you know, and it's like, yeah, you know, if you get hurt, it'll vibrate. And yeah. It's just, it helps get you into the game. And, you know, as always, and you know, this is, if you didn't already know this, you know, not everybody does, you can turn the vibration off. I don't think there's any PlayStation 1 game where you cannot turn the vibration off. Yeah, so that, you know, if it's not for you. And yeah, yeah, Flick moves, he walks too far or too slow, and you know, both, often both, and he'll, yeah, kind of slip or slide, ruining careful jumps by walking off the edge you jump to, though you stop walking, the player stopped walking. And this would have been extremely easy to avoid for the developers. They should have gone for gameplay rather than realism and physics in this case. Camera. The camera will sometimes work against you by centering your view every time you turn around, which makes it really difficult to get an overview of what's going on, making strategic movement way too difficult. And you know, it's this thing of, actually I'll get to that a little later on. And it makes it difficult to run away from enemies, because once you turn around, the camera turns with you. You know, turning the button you're pressing to run the opposite direction 180 degrees, making you run directly into what you were trying to run away from. And you know, it's very much an early 3D platform game. You know, it slowed down these very fast, you know, responsive games, and opened up the game world, with the third dimension way too much, and then they didn't know how to deal with the camera for that. That it's less of a problem in, today, they know what to do with the camera. Developers have had time to adjust to it, and yeah, platform games, just a lot of them work better in 2 dimensions. Yeah, too open, too empty levels that you slowly move through, since the developers were used to working exclusively with 2 dimensions. It's much easier to fill a level, to carefully design every element when there's only 2 dimensions. The moment that there's a third, that's a way bigger area to have to deal with. And yeah, I find that the 2D sections of the 3D Disney games work better, and the very best are the games that are in full 2D. Again, stuff like Aladdin, and yeah, the Hercules, it's been a while since I played it, but I remember it as most of the game being in 2D, and the 3D sections are bad. And same for Lion King, I want to say, but I didn't play that one very much. And that game also, it's one of those where they were worried that people would only rent the game because you could rent it for, what was it, like 48 hours or something. And they were worried that if you could complete the game in less than 48 hours, too few people would buy the game. And I can understand that, but it's a real jerk way to deal with that problem. It's, yeah, you should give us a reason to keep coming back rather than just forcing us to take forever to get through it. And that's actually something I find in this game. This game is not all that long, but if you keep coming back for the collectibles, that can be a lot of fun. And this game, you can replay any level that you've already completed, and like I said, it'll tell you if you collected this or that. So you're not gonna go back and replay a level only to find, oh, I already got all those things. The menu will tell you what you did and didn't get from that level, and the levels don't get more difficult when you replay them the way it is in other games. And yeah, and it helps a lot that in this game, for the camera, there is a center view key. And yeah, when the camera starts moving around, yeah, and unfortunately that doesn't always work. And it's very annoying when you're in kind of tight quarters, or just if you're not 100% sure where to go, you might accidentally walk into an enemy. That's something I find basically no game where just immediately touching an enemy will hurt you should ever just straight up hide the enemy. In something like Silent Hill, you might have trouble seeing the enemy, but you can hear that there's something around, and you'll use, you get an idea of what basic direction they are compared to where you are by, listening to the sound that they make, listening to where that's coming from. And berries and tokens. It's legitimately satisfying to collect and upgrade the berries and tokens in this game. And yeah, I already mentioned the butt stomp. If you jump twice, Flick will literally just land on his butt and, you know, raise his legs, land on his butt, which is, I really hope not too many kids like try to imitate that. That would probably hurt a lot. But yeah, and once he's landed, he can slide for a few seconds. Both the stomping and the slide can hurt enemies. And, you know, again, not all, but yeah. And the other attack is collecting berries, is throwing berries. And yeah, once again, you know, collecting grain helps you. You're throwing your other food for attacks, like in Aladdin and I want to say Tarzan. You know, as little sense as that makes from an in-world logic standpoint, you know, they had to find something they could attack with at range, and at least it's something that was in the movie too, you know. And at least in this, you're not always running around with the scimitar that Aladdin wields for maybe a minute and barely uses in the climax. You know, Hercules did have it easier in that, you know, in that respect, since the game starts around when you start training, and yeah, Hercules had the sword from then on out, so yeah. You know, in Hercules, they had to invent ranged attacks for him, and they just used magic, since there's a ton of magic in the movie in general, and that works fairly well. And that's probably the one that fares the best when it comes to ranged attacks in any of these, because it just says, well, we can just use this. So they came up with a bunch of different ranged attacks that, you know, as different as you can make them when it's basically a 2D platform jumper. You know, it's not, yeah. And the, you know, it's not like a BioShock game or something. You know, in Aladdin, the only thing you can do is throw apples, and in this, the only thing you can do is throw berries, and the berries aren't that different from each other. And yeah, with Hercules, there's no base value. I'm almost certain Hercules himself uses no magic, but you know, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's one of the good kind. It's a good kind of stretch. You know, the one that the kind that keeps you from injuring yourself when you're doing sports. It improves the game, and that goes back to what I said about creative freedom. That was a really good case of creative freedom. And you know, there's a boss fight where, you know, you're throwing berries at a boss, and Flick literally says, "Eat berries," and it's like, sure, berries are. I mean, if they're the right kind of berry, they're actually quite tasty. I don't know. It's the idea that he's carrying around poisonous berries, that's what he's throwing. I don't know. That might be in the movie, that at some point someone is about to eat a berry and someone else says, no, that's a poisonous berry, and I just don't remember. And oh, this says how long the enemies stay, you know, yeah, you know, taken out once you've hit them depends on the kind of berry you throw at it. That might actually, I didn't especially notice that, but that might be the case, and that again adds to the satisfaction of upgrading. But yeah, you start out with the red berry that can be upgraded into the blue super berry, the green homing berry, the purple mega homing berry, because in video games at some point it's always mega, and the golden berry. And the golden berry is incredibly powerful. It's, you know, one hit takes out basically any non-boss that hits, and you know, it explodes in a fireball. Kids, setting fire to bugs gets you into therapy, but doing so in this game, that's a winning strategy. And again, one would hope that no impressionable little kid watched the film and got violent with actual grasshoppers, but then you can say that about quite a few kids' films. And some levels don't contain the berries themselves, so the only way to get those berries is to collect enough purple tokens to get that berry from a seed. Otherwise, you do pick up, you know, they're another collectible, they're another item that you pick up. A berry of a certain color, pick that up, and that becomes the berry that you're using. And unfortunately, this was quite intentional. Sometimes the game is going to throw a worse berry than what you've got at you, and in the rare instance that that worse berry is a red berry, sucks, but you're going to have to get a better berry because, you know, and a bigger boat. There's no boss that can be taken out with a red berry, and there are a number of enemies that also cannot be taken out with those. You know, you face a bunch of grasshoppers that aren't bosses, and no grasshopper can be injured with a red berry. And there are a few other enemies, and sometimes the fact that it's homing also makes it way easier. You never actually aim. You basically direct you direct where the basic direction that Flick throws, but you don't have like an aiming function, which that might be incredibly frustrating on the PlayStation in an early 3D game, you know, considering early 3D games. So yeah. And there are basically, well, not of every single color, but 4 tokens to most of the different colors. I think there's at least one where there's only 3. And the brown tokens increase the number and types of brown plants, and basically brown plants are really useful for transporting you. Yeah, I'm going to get more into that. And the green tokens increase the number of leaves on the green plants that you plant, and those are basically, yeah, just a regular green plant with leaves on it, and every leaf on it lets you climb higher. You know, technically the very first one is 1 leaf, the second one is also 1 leaf, but the second leaf is higher, which means that you then need something else to get you to that leaf. But the third and fourth add more leaves and thus let you climb higher. It's somewhat like Groot in the prison of the first Guardians of the Galaxy film. You jump up the leaves, classic platformer style. Blue tokens raise the level of the power-up that comes out of the blue plant. Temporary invincibility, healing, a shield bubble around you that protects from attacks until worn down, which you can refill before it's empty, a super jump which you can't lose in the level once you get. Actually, I suppose it's possible that you lose it if you lose a life. But in that case, all you have to do is plant that plant again. The big thing is it's not temporary the way that the invincibility is. It's not something where you get it and then you have to really hurry and do the jumps before you lose it again. And yeah, I worried that it might mess up careful and smaller jumps, but that wasn't really my experience. And you know, the invincibility and healing disappear within seconds of spawning. And the same goes for any other time healing. It's these leaves, and that, you know, makes sense. You know, ant bites into a leaf and feels a little better, and the display is also. I'll get more into that. And yeah. Each leaf heals once, and you can survive being hit 4 times without healing. If you're hit a 5th time, you lose a life. And your health display is a leaf, and yeah, you can tell there are 4. When you first just see it, it's just whole. But then once you see 1 bite taken out of it, you can kind of tell, okay, there's room for 3 more bites off this, and it makes sense intuitively. Okay, if a bite is taken after there are no more bites to take off the leaf, I lose a life. So yeah. And that does mean that, you know, if you're hit 4 times and then you're healing, it can take a little while for yeah. And I think the healing plant, it should maybe have been a mini game instead of just a waiting game. Homer Simpson would rather play Hungry Hungry Hippos. It's, yeah, it's just annoying, and it's especially bad when you're in a level where, again, if the camera's counteracting you and you have to, yeah, you're sitting there waiting, hoping that it doesn't spit out the wrong thing, and yeah, just, yeah, basically the plants will continue to spit them out, and then they float down, and this can mean they land on a wall, sometimes in a wall, or otherwise unreachable, or at least will take you seconds to get to, and like I said, they fade out within, yeah. And a lot of times the plant will instead spit a spiky ball that hurts you, which, and those also disappear within moments. If you're low on health and then it spits out one of those balls, and you know, I mean, basically it'll spit in any, you know, if this is the plant, it can spit here, 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 you know, a bunch of different directions. So just, you know, don't walk into what it spat out until you're certain that it's a leaf. But there was one level where I waited for it to heal. I think it spat out 5 spiky balls before it spit out a single leaf, and then the first leaf it spat out landed in a wall. So yeah, that's really annoying. And yeah, I feel like in the Aladdin game, if you get, you know, there's basically this, like, crap, what's that called? It's basically the game, you know, not pinball. One Armed Bandit, is that what it's called in English too? The you know, it's got a handle, you pull it, and then it you know, 3 images will roll down, and if you get the same image 3 times, you get a prize. And yeah, you know, sort of that kind of machine is in the Aladdin game. I feel like maybe something like that for the healing, or just, I don't know, a mini game of some sort, I really think would be preferable to this. And in the levels that don't have the plant, which is maybe a third of the levels overall, healing items can be rare, and yeah, that gets really annoying. And sometimes enemies will turn into a healing item when you take them out. Why doesn't that happen more frequently? Especially when you have a really good berry, you know, such as a chuck. If you chuck berry at Chuck Berry, how much wood could a woodchuck? Anyway, yeah, you know, if you have an especially good berry, and I've checked, this isn't the case. Even if you have an especially good berry, it's not going to necessarily happen really often. And yeah, I don't know why that is. It really seems like that would make a lot of sense. Again, especially in these levels where there are a ton of enemies, and the enemy and a bunch of those enemies can shoot. You know, some of the city levels, you're constantly dealing with these big spiders that shoot webs, and sometimes you can't see the enemy as you're shooting at him, and you can't see where he's shooting a web. In stuff like that, especially these tougher enemies, if you take out like 5 enemies within a minute, let's say, I'd say at least one of those should lead to a leaf. And I'm almost certain that that happened at least once, and that it did not lead to a leaf. Yeah, maybe not even that. Just especially if you only have, if you're almost out of them, then it should, yeah. And yeah, Yellow tokens allow building auto turrets that fire increasingly effective berries. The first fires blue to the left, forward, and right of it. The second fires a purple berry upwards. And the third gives you a mine plant, which, you know, permanently eliminates any enemy that touches it. And that's, yeah. And, you know, some levels have you actually rely on these turrets since you can't find berry upgrades. And that's, again, it resets every single upgrade when you start a new level. And yeah, finding ways to take out the stronger enemies. It's something that doesn't happen a lot very early on, but gradually as you move through the game, these enemies become more common, and then you have to deal with that. You have to find some way to take out these enemies. And yeah, sometimes that means turrets, sometimes it means finding a berry, sometimes it means finding a token that leads to a berry. And it's just, it's, you know, these are, you know, yeah, it gives you a real goal in the level other than just moving through the level, taking out the enemies in the level, and these kinds of things. Where, yeah, I'll get more into that. I realize I'm saying that a lot in this video. And the homing berry is the two homing berries are very useful for enemies that move fast. And like I said, you can only direct what direction you're throwing. You can't aim them carefully. So you can't do the, you know, Space Invaders thing of, well, okay, clearly he's going to be, you know, if I throw the berry now, he's going to move a little, so I have to throw it where he's going to be. Yeah, you just can't necessarily get Flick to do that. So, and that's where the homing ones, yeah, it's very enjoyable when you get something better. And that, again, more so, you know, maybe the magic attacks in Hercules have some of the same, you know, effect. I'm not sure I'd really say that there's anything in Aladdin, and I love Aladdin, that is quite... The movie's pretty good as well, but especially that game. Man, I've spent many hours playing that. Seeds and plants. The seeds can be thrown onto some enemies, which will take them out, maybe, you know, squashing them like a small animal of some sort. You know, throughout each level are these seeds, and, you know, some seeds can be carried and thrown, some seeds are partially buried in the ground. You can do handstands on these. Wicked. And both of these types of seeds can be transformed by Flick into a specific kind of plant that can help him solve problems within levels. And the ones that are buried, some of those some of those are already specific plants, and you can't change what they are. And you can always tell. Basically, yeah, your basic seed is, you know, starts out orange, and you can, you know, which is for the brown ones. You can always create the basic brown one. You know, and this is the case whether they're buried or not. And the buried ones that can only be turned into a specific one, in addition to being buried, also has this, they're this kind of brownish color. And yeah, you can always tell. And, you know, each new type of brown plant lets you travel further up and or through the air once you're up there. And yeah, this is where we get into the brown tokens. The first one is just a mushroom that, of course, grants a minor basic bounce upwards. Then there's one that lets you float. There's one that spins you and propels you upwards. If you need to stop spinning fast, once you're already on the ground, just jump. And you can use the spinning one to allow you to float further before reaching the ground, which might be lava. Not literally, like the kids' game. And the propeller one can help in other ways. If you throw a seed onto it, it will propel that as well, allowing you to send it up to a higher platform. It can get annoying when it might bounce or the angle be wrong, since you're not plopping down the seeds, you're always throwing them, and sometimes if it starts to propel, if you need to get it up here and it starts from down here, as it's getting propelled, if it hits the wall before, or whatever it is, then it'll just fall back down, and you need to basically get it, maybe throw it from further away so that it floats a little higher up, so it has time to rise up as it, and then at the same time, if you throw it in a way where it just goes upwards, then it might, it might be carried over, but it might just drop back down, and it would help a lot if it was just easier to, maybe it should go into like a bird's eye view when you when you do this. Basically, if there was a button in this specific situation that would give you a bird's eye view. Actually, yeah, other times when you're throwing berries, a bird's eye view, in general, games should just let you go into a bird's eye view. Yeah, basically, you throw it, and the angle matters a lot, for reasons I've just explained, and the angle can be a little difficult for you to predict or control because of the controls and because of the camera, which might move, without you doing anything to get it to move. And the propelling one will make you spin for a few seconds if you're on foot, and spinning into an enemy may take them out. And the final brown one is a cannon that, you jump into, and it shoots you very far directly up, and you can direct yourself slightly, to get to the right, the right place, since it'll usually be that you're trying to get up a platform that's really high up. You're not only supposed to get directly up, and a number of the seeds are, hidden either up in the air or in places you can only get to by using the plants. And in some levels, you also have to figure out which plant to use where. And in really early levels, it's just a matter of, that's especially in the later levels. In the very early levels, it's just a matter of which order to get the seeds. I've already explained both brown and green. Let's say that there's a green over here, but it's a little high up in the air. If you can just put a brown, a token, sorry. If you can put a brown seed under there, maybe the bounce of that will let you go high enough up. And then, if there's another place where, and let's say you get another green one, and then you find a place where there's a token, but it's a slightly higher up, and now you have two seeds. Well, okay, you make a green one with a slightly higher leaf, and then a brown one next to it, so you bounce onto the green leaf, and then from the green leaf up. And it's really useful that the tokens give off a shadow, so when you're directly underneath it, you can tell what bit of the ground is directly underneath say, a token, or, you know, just anything that's floating up there. It could be a berry. And again, it's a little annoying that you can't just flick onto that specific spot and then just click a button to make him drop the seed where he's standing, but instead you basically have to throw it, and then you can see, well, okay, now the seed is directly on the shadow. You know, and in the very first levels, it's really easy to figure out which order to get the seeds, and those, you know, basically just train you in, yeah, how to get those. And, you know, that doesn't mean that everything in those levels is easy. Figuring out how to collect all the collectibles can get, you know, can be more difficult even in those early ones. And they get quite creative in how you use these. And yeah, the game is far more puzzle driven than any of the other Disney games that I've played, at least, where it's more timing reflex, jumping puzzles, fighting enemies, and avoiding touching harmful stuff. You know, and those you collect then use. Here you have to determine where and how to use these things that you collect, you know. And, you know, some of the variations for these are, you know, only appear in maybe 1 or 2 levels. I think there's at least one which appears in maybe 3 levels, but I only got to build it once. The others, it was already there, and it's a little too bad. Honestly, I think it would have been incredibly cool if this game had come with at least a simple version of a level creator. I think that would have been incredibly interesting. You know, like the way Portal 2 lets you build your own levels, you know, because there are these puzzle elements, and yeah, you can complete a ton of very different, you know, yeah, out of that. And I think that would have been incredibly interesting. Again, I'm not saying like complicated. You know, maybe something along the lines of like the StarCraft level editor, where, you know, you can't choose exactly how you know, you choose a patch of, you choose the basic design of a patch of ground, then you plop that down on there, and the game itself determines, you know, if there should be something special there. But yeah, basically that, or even just if there were like a bunch of presets that you could, you know, vary just a little bit, that would have been really great. It feels like they didn't use it to its full potential. Like there's a nugget of brilliance in the seed and token system here, and it's, you know, it's trying desperately to dig its way out of all this kind of, you know, you know, one limitation, for example, being that a lot of the early levels are designed to be very easy. You know, they didn't want to. Again, it's like with the benign tone of some of it. It's like they're worried that kids won't love it. They're worried that kids will get bored or scared or the like. And yeah, that's unfortunate. They could have gone a lot further, and that would have been really cool. If the first few levels allowed for way more complex stuff, at least for gathering stuff, you know, which ultimately it just doesn't. It's more difficult, and it's slightly more complicated, but yeah, it's not that much more complicated. And I mean, really, you could make like an open world game based on the seed token system, and just say, well, okay, how do you want to solve this problem? You know, like, yeah, something like a Hitman game, or the Deus Ex. You know, Deus Ex 1 with just, okay, do you want to collect a berry yourself, or do you want to build turrets? And that's also the thing. Once you have a token, once you have the tokens for it, you can build as many as you want. There was one level, I think I built like 3 turrets within a small section, and they were just gunning down these respawning enemies, and just, yeah, that could be really good. Yeah, that could be a solution in one of if you did a Deus Ex style game. Just set up a bunch of turrets and then lure the enemies into that or something. But yeah, I mean, if you took if you did like a search replace of various of these games, basically, other than the fact that it looks, sounds, and yeah, and that the design is from the Disney movie, a lot of these Disney action games are very basic stuff, and in this particular case, not that much. And I mean, you could make it if you wanted to remove it from the whole, and from the small bugs kind of thing. Yeah, you could just have it actually just instead of, yeah, make it like you find instruction manuals, and instead of seeds, they're these small, like, nano nanobots or something that you can program to do a certain thing, and instead of a plant, it's like this small machine that you've built that generates something. Or yeah, grain machine. Yeah, Flick's grain machine is present in certain levels, and if you find the machine, put it on, it'll destroy any enemy that you come into contact with. And the machine is also handy in collecting grain at distant ranges, and you cannot jump when you're in the machine. But yeah, that again is, if this game was like 3 times longer, so there were so many more times you got to use the grain machine, you got to use the different seeds and tokens, well, different tokens. The seeds are the same. There are only the 3 types of seeds. But yeah, something like that. And like levels where you don't necessarily, where it's like you can, okay, if you just want to complete the level, the door's right there, whatever. But here, have all these tokens, there are a bunch of seeds, there are some places that you could, there are some areas that you could move to if you want, there are some enemies for you to deal with if you want, If they let you like create levels and maybe like put boss enemies in so that you could take out a boss with, something completely different, or yeah, that would be really cool. AI and enemies, or slash enemies rather. There we go. Some enemies can be eliminated by jumping on them Mario style. Some enemies have ranged attack, some enemies fly, sometimes they might walk. Some of the ones that can fly walk, some of the ones that, yeah, sometimes they'll fly a little, sometimes they walk a little. A few of them are like, will react with an attack that has them fly or has them walk instead when you get close. And most enemies only come directly at you if you're very close, but touching them, regardless of what they're doing, will hurt you. Again, other than the butt stomp, jumping on them, sliding into them, spinning into them, and if you have like invincibility or the shield. Yeah. And there are flies and bees that move in a set pattern but go in for stinging you if you get close. There are worms that suddenly erupt, triggered by proximity from their hole in the ground. Just keep an eye on the ground for that hole. The bugs that erupt from the side are worse, since it's harder to tell where they'll come from, though it is always the same place. And you might accidentally walk into one, for reasons I explained in the control section. And yeah, the grasshoppers, I already mentioned that not all of them are bosses. They'll patrol back and forth. There are beetles that stand guard, and you have to hit them in the face if you use berries. And they duck and cover and are safe from them when you face them if you throw berries. Like, if you're not throwing berries, they'll just be looking at you. But the moment you throw a berry, they're gonna duck and cover. So what you need is, either use different tactics or use seeking berries. Throw, then turn away from them, and they won't duck, and it'll hit them in the face. It reminded me a lot of the rocks in Commander Keen 4. I can't believe I don't remember the full name of that. Secret of the Oracle from Goodbye Galaxy, the second, meant to be a trilogy, but it was only 2 games for some reason. Yeah, I'm not going to get too much into Commander Keen. Not in this video. Yeah, and, otherwise you may, yeah, I'm not going to get into that here. Boss, enemies, / battles. And battles. Now, there are a few boss battles that are very easy and straightforward, but several of them, honestly, most of the boss battles are distinct and relatively creative. Some of them you're just, you pick up the berry, you throw it. Some of them, you have to jump between different platforms in order to attack. Maybe you need to dodge objects. Maybe you need to follow the boss and solve some puzzles along the way. That is one thing I will say. There's at least one where that's the case, and you have a really difficult time telling where the boss is when he moves, and where exactly you're supposed to go in order to be able to follow. Well, not so much follow him, but when he just moved a little bit, where exactly you're supposed to attack him from. And that would have been really easy to fix by just every single time that happens, instead of just kind of playing a sound that could just as easily be from him just, randomly threatening you. Instead of just doing that, simply have a short cutscene in-engine. The game has tons of those, especially when you encounter allies. Especially for the first time you encounter allies. Yeah, just a brief in-engine cutscene, and I feel like they probably meant to, but maybe ran out of time or something, because it really feels there's like a big hole where where it's really obviously missing, and just yeah, all it had to do was just show, okay, now he's here, he's moving over here, and that's, yeah. Other than that, the game does tend to help you find the path and such. And some of the enemies are grasshoppers, but yeah, there are a few others as well, and I'm not going to get into what they are. One thing I will say that's a little weird is that there's this one animal that's in several levels of the game, and sometimes you have to dodge it, sometimes you're supposed to try to throw berries at it, and then other times you're supposed to basically use it in some way. Like, yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about that. And honestly, when, you know, again, yeah, if I'd watched the movie really close to playing the game, maybe this would have been clearer. But when I threw berries at it, I actually thought that it was gone. So when it reappeared, I was like, wait, I thought I took it out with berries several levels ago. And yeah. And the bosses don't tend to behave all that differently from each other. You know, they'll maybe throw stuff at you or walk into you or the like, and that is the kind of thing where, I mean, if it had been like moving a lot from side to side, that would have been like, you know, and then you have to throw berries to hit it right. That would have been really frustrating since you can't direct it that much. But other than that, yeah, it just, all in all, that would have helped a lot to, but yeah, the game is not that, there's a decent variety of enemies, but ultimately the enemies just, you know, some of them come at you from proximity. Other than that, they just tend to walk in a small area in a set pattern. Yeah, that's, you know, and that's an area where they didn't do a lot. You know, where comparatively they put the you know, I mean, there are tons of platform games that have far more compelling enemies than this. And yeah, in this game they focused on the seed and token system. Now, at times in, you know, some of the boss levels, you still kind of have to use the seed and berry systems, and in those it can sometimes feel like, almost like, you know, they were contractually obligated to put, you know, this kind of stuff in every single level. And yeah, and you could maybe say that there are a few too many boss fights. It's compared to how long the game is, there are too many boss fights. You end up spending too much of the game just fighting bosses. No multiplayer or co-op. Some have pointed out that it would have been really good for, like, you know, some kind of multiplayer, maybe just mini games or something. And, you know, I mean, I'm not sure that maybe something like with, you know, standard shooter kind of multiplayer mode with, like, you know, deathmatch or something. You know, if the berries were in certain parts of the levels and would respawn, so you'd have to get to the powerful ones fast, and they would be able to more quickly take out the other players. Or, you know, if you were maybe racing to build plants, then, you know, that would be, hypothetically, if each player had like a, you know, well, I guess they would, yeah, you maybe have to do two-player then and just split screen. If both players were trying to get, you know, from, basically, let's say there's a wall and you start out here, you have to get over here, and in order to do so, you have to get certain plants and use them right, and then it's a race to figure out exactly what, you know, and it's maybe like more or less randomly generated, a la Age of Empires 2, you know, multiplayer levels, and yeah, skirmish levels as well, but just where it more or less randomly generates, and you have to quickly deduce how to get the different tokens, the order in which to get them, and how exactly to use them to best get, you know, that could be incredibly interesting. and or otherwise something like co-op, again with the puzzles Portal 2 style, where yeah, hypothetically, let's say that each player can only use the tokens that they've picked up, and you have to make sure that, and as such, one player builds one particular plant, and another player builds a complementary plant, and together they manage to, yeah, that could be really interesting. Graphics. Now, the draw distance could be better, and this was especially something I noticed in some of the very last levels. Sometimes you can't see an enemy before you get a tad too close for comfort. And yeah, some have praised the graphics, some have criticized them. They're basically okay, and yeah, it pretty much looks the way it does in the movie, although since this was very early 3D game where the movie has great animation, the game doesn't completely look like, and this is again where the 2D, Aladdin and Hercules, Tarzan, Lion King, they look the way they're supposed to because these are the same, some of the same animations, some of the same character models and such. And here, they're the same basic character models, but textures and movement and such is just not quite the same, in part because it was so new and developers were still getting used to the 3D engine for platformers. It wasn't, there were 3D games before, Wolfenstein 3D and Super Mario Land 1, I think, came out about the same time, so it's not, but for a platformer, it was, yeah. And I mean, basically, the game runs more or less, just, yeah, fine. Some people say that they've experienced slowdown and such. I didn't really experience that. Sound/music. Now, yeah, basically both, again, really fit the levels and the overall kind of the world. There's not really any music or any sound effect that doesn't fit. Some of the music is really repetitive and boring, and some of the taunts from bosses and such are also really just, I mean, they barely recorded any different lines, and then they just keep repeating that. Is it challenging? There's only one difficulty setting, and that's something I really think would have been a good place to, again, on higher difficulty settings, the puzzles could have started out tougher and stuff like that. But anyway, it is challenging, though overall it's relatively easy. It's, if it's the first platformer you play, definitely start with a 2D platformer and get used to that kind of thing before, yeah. It's just yeah, if you know how to play a platformer, and once you learn the various systems that you have to work with, at that point it's not that difficult, and certainly, the difficulty comes more from the bad camera and such. Now, it took me 6 hours on this playthrough. If I wanted all the collectibles, the game would probably take 2 or 3 times longer than that. which gives you an idea of how difficult it is to get all of them in some of the levels. And keeping in mind, I've played this game a number of times before, and there were 2 levels that took me upwards of an hour each, but otherwise less. Those were the ones where I couldn't quite remember what to do, so I was kind of, and where it was like a real puzzle more than just, as I've been saying, tasks, where a lot of the levels, it is just moving from point A to point B, and it's not particularly difficult. And replaying for collectibles can be quite enjoyable since you now know how the level goes, and it'll be the same, not tougher as in some other games. And when you've completed a level, you can save. You don't have to collect all of a certain bonus item. You don't have to use passwords that you can only unlock by collecting all of a certain bonus item, in contrast to Hercules. And, of course, you shouldn't take the memory card out or put it in as you're saving. And you also shouldn't take the disk out without turning off the machine first. So why didn't they just make it so that the eject button turns the machine off first? And worse still, since I used the PlayStation 2, since my PlayStation 1 died, it had a long run. I got it in '99 and it only recently stopped working. Well, it's been a few months since I otherwise had tried games on it, but yeah, there's this DVD player I had which would automatically pull the DVD tray back in if you turned it off while it was out. And that does happen on the PlayStation 2 as well, but as it is, I have to hold down the off button, which pushes the console slightly unless I hold it in place. If I just press it, it reboots. Why not reverse those? Then I press eject, the disc comes out, then I have to turn it off again. Why does ejecting it turn it back on? On the PlayStation 1, you could eject without turning it back on, and that it's a mechanical thing rather than, yeah. Now, if you run out of lives, you will have to start the game over, and you start out with 5, and, you can get an extra life in any, 1 extra life in each level. And since the levels are short, you can just load, just stop playing the level, go to the memory card, reload your, so to before you lost the life, and then start playing the level again. It's especially once you know what to do in a level, you can go through a lot of them quite fast. And any hit stun locks at least some enemies, and not all enemies can be taken out with berries. And you're not yourself really stun locked by taking damage, although do notice that if you keep touching an enemy, they will hurt you several times within relatively few seconds. You don't get very much of, like, yeah, I forget what it's called, but there's not very long between the, yeah. And and if you do lose a life, you will basically start pretty much exactly where you lost that life, and you've lost nothing other than the life. No progress, no tokens or anything. It can sometimes be very hard to avoid being hit, even repeatedly, even within a short space of time. And yeah. And the material is rated as being acceptable to 3-year-olds. That has to be like watching someone else play. There's no one below the age of 7 could complete this game without someone older helping them. But, at that, I mean, entirely by himself, a 7-year-old? Maybe. I mean, if they're, like, focused and they, and yeah, and they come to understand the different, and this is, I mean, you know, in my very critical review of Mini Ninjas, the one game that IM Interactive have done that is just bad, well, I haven't played the newest Hitman yet, but it doesn't sound just bad. You can't complete that game as like a 7-year-old. There's just, yeah, some of the, oh, anyway, yeah, very small children, the ones that are small enough to find the really stupid of the humor of that game funny, are not going to be able to complete the game. And at that point, just what's the point? Just make a game that would be fun for the people who, you know, a game should primarily be fun for the people who play that game. You shouldn't make a game that's funny to watch other people play, for, in my opinion. But yeah. And some people have found that they couldn't quite complete the game, that some of the last levels were just too difficult, and I can understand that. Again, part of it is that when I played this, I was already pretty used to bad 3D platformer camera and controls, and you know, yeah, I found the, excuse me, the token system, excuse me, the token seed systems quite intuitive. And I mean, if you have trouble working out how to use them, or if you just get really unlucky and the physics, like, you know, like I mentioned, how you have to float some seeds up, and I mean, if you keep trying that and it just keeps failing, I can understand just, you know, rage quitting. Level design. You move about the anthill and its tunnels, the riverbed, the big city, various forest areas, and there are a few levels where Dot will fly around telling you to follow her, and she will indeed go directly to where you need to go to progress. And in some levels, you have to swing on vines, and I mean, that's always the very first games to have that. It was often kind of difficult to get it to swing properly. You know, this is, it's a little bit of an issue as well in, I want to say, Half-Life Opposing Force. I think you could climb, but I don't think you could swing in the original Half-Life. But it's been maybe a year since I last played that, so that is also a game I've played quite a few times, and I will be reviewing. Yeah, it's especially bad in this because of that camera, and whenever you have to deal with a vine, and there's one level where you have to, I think there's at least 5 in the level, and that gets really annoying. And yeah, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and say there's at least one level where basically, like, acorns, and you know, considering that you're an ant, you can figure out that an acorn is going to be pretty big. Acorns keep rolling towards you. I thought I was supposed to jump over them and found that very difficult. Turns out you're basically supposed to hug the wall, at least some of the times. I didn't start the level over and try that every time, but once I realized that, that turned out, you know, so it's not that you have to time this jump with this character that moves slowly, and yeah, no, it's just that the moment you see an acorn, you hug the wall, you know, and I didn't think that was quite as intuitive as it should maybe have been, because it looked like I would be able to jump over it, and it's not a game where you usually hug the wall, but yeah. And, you know, in a lot of, yeah, just to briefly go into, you know, some of the levels, there are these brief blind path offshoots of the obvious main linear path, and you unlock them by collecting like 10, 20, or 30 grains of corn. And it doesn't take away corn to open one, it just means that if you pass one and it has a high number, maybe you have to go back later on. And yeah. And some enemies give a grain when you first take them out. And and basically I didn't actually have to open any of those barriers to progress, but then there are other levels where there are barriers like that, and you do have to pass each and every one to complete the level, and in that case, that's the goal for the level. Just go around collecting grain, then go to the door to open it, and move on to the next area. Rinse and repeat. And really, I found that the levels tend to be fairly linear. It's pretty obvious where I need to head, and sometimes I just don't have the tokens or occasionally the berries, grains, or the like that I need yet. So I look through the newer current area that isn't on that linear path, you know, go by process of elimination. And part of that can be that if there are grains or the like easily accessible in an area that you for sure haven't been everywhere in, you for sure haven't been everywhere in it. And if you can't see what's up above you or just further along the path in an area you haven't gotten to, go there or find out how to get to there and go from there. You know, you don't get lost the way that you do in like the Thief games, for example. They're not that open and that complex. You know, obviously not anywhere near that level, but just no, really, you don't get lost. You don't find yourself, you know, going along a path and then suddenly realize, oh wait, this is just a different way to get back to where I already came from. And there are these spyglasses, floating spyglasses that let you see where to go, and you know, sometimes they are literally just showing you exactly where to go, and Flick will say, ah, that's where I need to go, but some of them show something that isn't needed but a bonus, such as the golden berry. And something I find kind of annoying, when you load your game, you have to scroll past every level you've completed, you know, considering how many levels there are. Like I said, there are a bunch, they're just really short, a lot of them. Why not just go directly to the most recent level? I know other PlayStation 1 games that do that when you load. And the game actually starts with a tutorial level, which always a good thing, and it teaches you about the token, you know, tokens and seeds, grains, letters. I'm not sure it teaches you any of the advanced berries, but it does teach you to throw the regular berries. And I do think that the boss levels are decently spaced out. You know, I've played games where suddenly, okay, this is the boss fight section, so you have to fight several bosses in a row. In this one, they tend to space them out, and the first one is actually very early on in the game, and yeah, it's there are too many of them considering how short the game is, but they are spaced out, so you're not constantly just spending time fighting them. There's this one level that apparently in English, I looked it up, is called Horsefly Mayhem, and in my language it's called Horsefly Ragnarok. That's... You're at a 10, you need to be at a 2. And that's everything. Please comment, thumbs up, and subscribe for more content.